Hi everyone, it's Nick. I'm going to give just a quick disclaimer and say this one might get controversial. Some of you may know that I've been a fan of the Fire Emblem games since Fire Emblem 6, The Binding Blade. But the most recent entry in the series, Fire Emblem Three Houses, definitely did some things that left me pretty fearful of where the series is moving. You would think that I would love the fact that so many people are being introduced to the Fire Emblem series and are loving it, but it left me feeling almost the opposite. While many people loved this game, especially some series newcomers, I felt it was important to figure out why this game left such a sour taste in my mouth. I thought it was a good idea to look at the series as it changed with the times. The first step in this process is to see the origins of the series. Now let's take a quick history of the Fire Emblem franchise and the three different eras that I would say they can roughly be classified. The beginning of the series I would classify with its creator, Shozo Kaga. This covers the games Fire Emblem 1 to Fire Emblem 6, with the main consoles being the Famicom and the Super Famicom. These are all basically the games before the West had a Fire Emblem game localized for them. These games were known to be brutally difficult, and the main cause of this was the permadeath mechanic. This mechanic was the basis of the game's risk-reward strategy. Are you trying to divide and conquer the map? Don't spread yourself too thin, otherwise you'll risk losing some crucial units. However, these units don't just die on the map. They were completely removed from the story as well. When asked about the creation of the Fire Emblem series, Kaga said, "I wanted to make a strategy game that was more dramatic, something where you would really be able to feel the pain and struggle of the characters. That's why characters can't be revived once they're killed, to impart a sense of gravity and seriousness. In turn, I think the result is the more love you have for the characters, the more rewarding the game is." This mechanic that was so refreshing and unique to the series became something that defined it. It was a game that was extremely tough, but immensely rewarding as well. People who played these games became immersed with the character, setting, and story that Fire Emblem was known for, and permadeath was a crucial game mechanic that helped cause this connection in its players. The second chapter I would call the handheld era. Not every game in this era was on a handheld, for example Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, but a majority of these games were. This covers the games Fire Emblem 7, The Blazing Blade, to Fire Emblem 12, New Mystery of the Emblem. This era set a standard or expectation for Fire Emblem games in the West, as it was truly their first localized Fire Emblem games. They were less difficult than the Shozo Kaga era, but some of these games still retained that tough difficulty the series was known for. Many games earlier in this era still included the permadeath system as well. However, the team at Intelligent Systems made a huge risk in this era. They decided to make permadeath optional in New Mystery of the Emblem. To no one's surprise, many series veterans did not like this change. To them, the game was being dumbed down and something integral to the series was being stripped away. To new players, they could finally get to experience a full Fire Emblem game without the danger of losing a character that they fell in love with. They could also have a better chance of beating the game. This era marked the first time where permadeath was not required, and with it, one of the core identities of the franchise. Say what you will about the mechanic, but in the early games, it was part of the gameplay that many players would consider a staple to the series. These games caused a divide between player bases, but I still wouldn't say the split was significant to this point. Besides the permadeath mechanic, the tactical gameplay was kept fairly similar to the games before it. The character design still retained that Fire Emblem flair as well. However, changes were on the way, and these changes would be bringing about some fierce negativity from lifelong fans. The 3DS to the present era. This era covers the games from Awakening to Three Houses. It is controversial to include Shadows of Valentia due to it being a huge outlier in how the games are being made because it was a remake of Fire Emblem Gaiden. But this was where a lot of things started to be changed, and to some degree, it was necessary. At this point, Fire Emblem was struggling to keep people interested in their games. The sales were slumping with each new game, and they decided if they were going down, they were going to go down swinging. Fire Emblem Awakening, or Fire Emblem 13, was a celebration of the series like no other game in the series before it. The development team wanted to bring everything back. The marriage and offspring mechanic came back from Genealogy of the Holy War, which up to that point was the only game in the Fire Emblem series that had that mechanic. The support system was interwoven in the off-screen mechanic, which led some people to believe that Awakening was a partial dating sim rather than just a tactical game. They were even considering some radical differences like setting the story on Mars. While they decided against some of these ideas, the team decided to keep the option to turn off permadeath. Needless to say, old school players didn't like this, but Intelligent Systems was not done there. The next game in this series was Fire Emblem Fates, covering Birthright, Conquest, and Revelations. Fates was pretty much working off the ground that Awakening started, and this caused some internal conflicts with the development team. Fates had a lot of the team that wanted to embrace the fan service elements that worked well in Awakening. Some of the team even cited that those features were the reason why the series was being saved. Other parts of the team wanted to keep the strength of the game with the story and the setting of the world, and thought that going even further on the fan service elements would detract hardcore fans and weaken the memorability of the characters. This sparked a divide in the team on which area to focus on and expand for Fates. Permadeath still existed, but there was another casual mode added because some players still couldn't beat the game. Phoenix mode was added as a result to help more players finish the game, where a unit would be revived during the next player turn. Because of these changes, the devs threw a bone to old school players by trying something a bit unique. Fates decided to split their audience based on the games. Birthright was for the more casual fan base, while Conquest was for the old school fans. While I adore Fire Emblem Echoes, besides how greedy it was with microtransactions, I'm gonna skip on it, because it's a huge outlier when discussing this era. If we consider the history of the series, Awakening was not expected to be the smash hit that it was. It actually saved the franchise on how successful it was. The handheld to home console era showed a huge slump in number of game copies sold. A new approach was necessary to keep the series alive, and Awakening took the necessary risks. The issue was that not everyone liked the changes that kept the franchise alive. As the newer Fire Emblem games were being made, more people became divided. There are two main issues that come up frequently when discussing the modern Fire Emblem games. These issues are the difficulty of the series was known for and the fan service elements that were added. Permadeath is an issue that, to be honest, I don't care much about, but it is worth discussing because it caused a pretty big rift in the community. Permadeath is where a unit in your party dies in battle, the unit is permanently lost for the rest of the game. Whether you think this mechanic is necessary or not, it did define the series since its beginning. Defenders of the system would say how it brings you closer to the characters as you want to keep all of them alive, and how it made the combat more rewarding. Other players would say that it's a huge entry barrier for people to play and beat the game. Me personally, I adored this system. It allowed the player to play one of the most enjoyable risk-reward mechanics in any game I've ever played. You want to send your most powerful unit to clear off a section of the map? Go ahead, but if he or she dies, you're pretty screwed for the rest of the game. The strategies that you implement to keep everyone alive made these maps addicting. With the option to turn this off, however, the game becomes a whole lot easier. I understand what the developers were thinking when including this option. A lower entry barrier means more people can play and finish the game while still enjoying the combat, characters, story, class changing, etc. I was never too upset that the option to turn off permadeath was added because most of the people I personally knew played on classic mode still, or started on casual mode to work their way up to classic mode eventually. They would use the casual mode as a stepping stone for future playthroughs. The next point, though, works in tandem with this one, and at least why Fire Emblem Three Houses was a disappointment to me. Fire Emblem Awakening, Fire Emblem Fates, and Fire Emblem Three Houses all did things that attempted to mix up the Fire Emblem formula. However, Intelligent Systems still believed that one of the reasons Awakening was so successful was because of the fan service elements that were implemented. Fates took that fan service that was presented in Awakening and pushed it even further. Three Houses toned it down, but the damage was already done at that point. A new audience was created for Fire Emblem games, and that audience liked the series for very different reasons. Now, let me be clear. I do not think that Fire Emblem Three Houses is a bad game. What I dislike is the trend that these games show for the future of the series. Let me reiterate, I do not think that Fire Emblem Three Houses is a bad game. It is a fantastic game with robust class-changing options, unique characters, great combat, and a decent premise to put as the focus of the game. I'm not even trying to make the case that it's a bad Fire Emblem game either. I briefly talked about the prior games for you all to see how the previous games hooked its old school fans and what they stuck around for. Fire Emblem Three Houses was a disappointment for me because it shows how the series plans to progress. Permadeath doesn't really matter to me, but it shows how easy the combat is becoming. Besides Fire Emblem Birthright and Sacred Stones, this is by far the easiest Fire Emblem game I've ever beaten, even on hard classic mode. I never got the same adrenaline rush of surviving a tough turn than having to adapt quickly as reinforcements are coming to help. The feeling of accomplishment after beating a tough map is pretty much gone now. To me, the focus of the game has shifted into something that no longer appeals to why I fell in love with the Fire Emblem series. This series used to prioritize brutally difficult tactics situations and added some nice character supports in some of the Game Boy Advance era games. The parts of the Fire Emblem games that I was able to overlook are now becoming priorities when creating the game, while the combat keeps being pushed aside from game to game. As a game alone, Three Houses is good, but it's not what attracted me to the series or will keep me coming back to it. While I call Fire Emblem Three Houses a disappointment, I'm not calling it a bad game or criticizing people who like it. I call it a disappointment because this could be the point where I leave the series for good. To me, Fire Emblem Three Houses had the chance to do what Echoes did and show what old school Fire Emblem was all about, but a lot has changed up to this point. And I understand that no series will stay the same forever. Just look at Final Fantasy and see how the game has changed throughout the years. It doesn't surprise me that Fire Emblem changed as well, but I didn't think it would cause me to lose this much interest in the series. I cannot stress this enough, especially because people will make assumptions based on the title of the video. Fire Emblem Three Houses is a good game and deserves every bit of recognition it received. It is a disappointment because of where the series has already gone and might be where I personally leave the series. I did not enjoy much of my time playing it, but I do see its appeal to both old school and newer fans. I'm happy that more people are enjoying the Fire Emblem series, but unfortunately, I'm just not one of them. I wish it was different, because it really sucks losing interest in a game series that you once loved. Thank you so much for watching. Go ahead and use that comment section to tell me what you think. I knew when scripting this that it would get controversial, so I would love to have some feedback discussing what you liked and disliked about the game. This is Nick, signing off.